it was probably the hippest hot spot of the time. It was the Viper Room in West Hollywood. That night, an A-list of stars were playing. One of his best friends was Flea, the bassist from Red Hot Chili Peppers, lately of Super Bowl fame. The other person playing in the band that night was the co-owner of the Viper Room, Johnny Depp. The band was in the middle of their set, and a young star named River Phoenix was in the process of overdosing on drugs. As the band played, he began to convulse, went outside, and laid down in the median strip in the sidewalk on the grass, where he foamed at the mouth for 5 minutes and then went into complete cardiac arrest. By the time the paramedics came, he was already dead. When they did the toxicology report on him, they found that his blood levels of heroin mixed with cocaine were through the roof. River Phoenix was one of the rising stars in Hollywood of his day. He was 23 years old when he died. Last week, right about this time, Philip Seymour Hoffman was found in his New York apartment. There were 5 empty bags of heroin with as many as 72 others in his apartment building. Philip Seymour Hoffman won the Academy Award for Best Actor. He was nominated 3 times for Best Supporting Actor. He'd received 3 Tony Award nominations for his work in the theater. He was an actor's actor. No one will look at Truman Capote again the same way. He was at the top of his game with a personal fortune worth over $35 million. And last Sunday, he died. Lance Armstrong did what nobody else has ever done. He won the Tour de France 7 times. And yet his life and his career were a lie. And he didn't care who he had to destroy in order to keep the facade up. But while the facade was up, it was a thing of amazing beauty to watch the dude perform. But how many of us can forget the sit down and chat with Lance and Oprah when all of it came crashing down around him and the lies became public? We go on and on. But what do these people have in common? Well, they probably have a lot of things in common. But preeminently, they're people who succeeded, and succeeded big time. They also have something else in common. They're people who lost their souls, and 2 of them lost their lives. And they're exactly the type of people that Jesus was talking about in Matthew 16:26, when Jesus asked, "What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give to get their soul back?" People that we listed today, and maybe you can think of others in your mind, had money, they had fame, they achieved things, they had power, and there's nothing wrong with any of those things in and of themselves. But why is it that they seem to cause so much pain? Maybe it's because money and fame and achievement and power are often taken out of their proper context. And instead of being a means to an end, they become an end in and of themselves. Money for the sake of money. Fame to be famous. Power to be powerful, without any context whatsoever. And the context in which Jesus speaks, and the context which many of us are in this morning, is the context of a relationship with God, in which all of those things are redeemable and all of those things can be good. But outside of the context of a relationship with God, money, fame, power, and achievement will suck the life out of you, because you have to maintain them. And pursuing them for the sake of having them alone will kill your soul. When Jesus talks about gaining the world and forfeiting your soul, I can't imagine that he doesn't look back to what's recorded in Matthew chapter 4:8, where in his temptations after fasting in the wilderness, he meets up with Satan, the tempter. And Satan has various things that he shows to Jesus. And at one point, he takes him up to the top of a mountain. And Matthew says that laid out before Jesus were all the kingdoms of the world. And Satan says to Jesus, I'll give you all of them. Well, actually, if you think about it, that's why Jesus came. Jesus came so that all of the kingdoms of the world, all of the power would be his. Because God is in the midst of recreating everything and bringing everything back to himself. It's really what Jesus came to do, except there's a slight twist to the offer that Satan gives. Because in Matthew chapter 4, verse 8, it says, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and said, all of this I will give to you if you will bow down and worship me. And there's the subtle difference. All of the kingdoms, all of the power of the world presented to Jesus, just as God intended, except God never intended him to keep them for himself. Because Jesus didn't come to keep the power. Jesus didn't come to keep the kingdom. Jesus didn't come to bring those to himself. Jesus came to present everything back to God. And that's the rub. And that's in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 24 and 28, just in case you're wondering, where Paul writes, then the end will come when he, that's Jesus, hands over the kingdom to God the Father after he has destroyed all dominion, authority, and power. When he has done this, verse 28, then the Son himself will be made subject to him who put everything under him, so that God may be all in all. Jesus comes to have the power, to receive the kingdoms, but not to keep them for himself. Jesus comes to get those things, to present them back to God, so that God becomes everything and has everything again. Jesus could have taken the kingdom that was offered to him at the time of Satan. Think how much easier that would have been. You know, no cross, no pain, no suffering, no passion. I mean, you know, what would we do the Friday before Easter? But at what cost? His soul and our salvation. Outside of a context of a relationship with God, outside of following in obedience what God has for us, money, fame, power, and achievement will suck the life out of you. And pursuing them as an end in themselves will kill your soul. And that's why Jesus asks the question of his disciples in Matthew 16:26. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give to get their soul back once they've sold it? And the answer to that question is, it doesn't do you any good. It doesn't do you any good to trade your soul for the entire world. If you give your soul to those things, you can never get your soul back. So the easy message is, don't chase after those things. Don't take money out of the context of your relationship with God. Don't take fame or achievement out of your relationship with God where they are put into perspective. Some of us in our congregation are extremely successful. Some of us have done very well in business or in medicine or whatever your chosen field is. You have done exceeding well. Some of us live lives of great significance, either through what we are doing in our jobs or through our avocations or through serving in our community. Some of us have done great things in those areas. Some of us have made a tremendous amount of money and are really have a lot of means at our disposal. And those things are all good. This isn't a sermon about why money is bad or why power is bad or why achievement is bad. Those are all good things. This is a sermon about what happens if you just chase after those things. And if money or power or your achievement becomes the all in all. Because being in relationship with God will bring you life. And those things can all be used as a tool. All of those other things will suck the life out of you. When Jesus says, what does it gain for somebody, what does it profit a person to gain the whole world but lose their soul? The Greek word that he uses there, and I trot this out because I think it's important, not just to tell you how good I am at Greek because I'm terrible at it, is the word psyche, which comes down to us in psychology. And what the word psyche in that ology word means is really your very inner self, who you are in your core being. That's a little bit easier to unpack than soul, because soul is a little bit ethereal. Deep in your core being, the person that you are really inside, if your ultimate desire is to lay up as much money as you can, it will cost you your soul. If your ultimate desire outside of a context of a relationship with God where he's able to use your gifts and the things that he gifts you to earn, power will end up killing your soul in your innermost being. Jesus says, don't let those things kill you in your innermost being. Don't seek after the things that will kill you. Instead, seek after the things that will give you life. Now, why does Jesus say this at this point? What's the context in which he talks? One of the things that I love for us to do is to move out of just the Bible promise boxes where you get one verse at a time that lives outside of whatever the context it is, but to put things into the real story of what Jesus is doing. The reason that I think this is so important is because the Bible is not mythology. The Bible is the story of God's interaction with real people in real time, in a real place, with real problems and real issues and real needs. So let's put what Jesus asked, this question: what good is it for you if you sell your soul and gain the whole world? How will you ever get your soul back? What's the context of what he's talking about? Well, you can flip back if you want to, but otherwise just trust me. We're in Matthew 16. If you flip back to Matthew 14, you have Herod trying to figure out who Jesus is. And Herod is haunted by a couple of things. Herod is one of the worst people that ever walked on the face of the earth. In fact, the Romans had a saying about Herod that it's kind of a nice pun in Greek. It doesn't come over into English. But the Romans said that it was better to be Herod's pig than it was to be his son, because his pig had a longer life expectancy, because Herod killed his family to maintain his throne. But the thing that really haunts Herod is that he also killed John the Baptist. And Herod is bothered by this. He didn't want to do it, but he did it because he didn't want to lose face at a dinner party. So, after you've had a couple of glasses of wine at a dinner party, be very careful what you promise to do, because it may come back and haunt you. And so he begins to hear about this prophet. And Herod wants to know who it is. And Herod believes this is John the Baptist raised from the dead. So the question is raised by Herod himself: who is this? And we go immediately from Matthew 14 with Herod asking the question of who is this guy, to Jesus feeding the 5,000 men, women and children in addition. Who is this guy who can feed all of these people with very little? We move immediately from the feeding of the 5,000 people. They walk down from the mountains there on the north end of the Sea of Galilee. If you were there with us in October, you can picture it. And they get in the boat and they go out on the sea, and that's when the storm kicks up, and everybody thinks they're going to die because they're out in the boat by themselves, and Jesus comes walking on the water and invites his disciples to have faith in him. And this is the first time you hear the disciples say, he's got to be the Son of God. Who is he? He's the person who can meet people's needs. He's the person who can calm the storm. He must be the Son of God. And then Matthew goes on in chapter 14, and there's all sorts of healings. This is the guy who has control over nature. This is the guy who can heal people. And then, just because you want to make sure that you get the idea, in Matthew 15, Jesus feeds 4,000 more people. Just to put an exclamation mark on it. And then you get to Matthew 16. And you have a story that happens in Caesarea Philippi, which is about 40 miles to the north, a pretty good jog. And this is where Jesus asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? We're still answering the question that Herod asked in the beginning of chapter 14. Who is this guy? And so Jesus turns around and he poses the questions to his followers. Who is this? Who do people say that I am? And Peter finally says, they say this, they say that, but I know who you are because I saw you out on the Sea of Galilee. You are the Christ. You are the Son of God. And for the one time in the entire biblical record, Jesus goes, yes! That's exactly who I am. And then Jesus says, and this is what has to happen next. I have to go to Jerusalem, and I have to die. This is what it looks like. This is what I am going to do to bring life. And Peter goes, no. And Jesus says, yes. And that's the context in which Jesus asks the question. And I kind of wonder, if Jesus himself isn't hearkening back to that moment when everything was laid out before him and it would have been so easy to just take the kingdom and the power at that point. Maybe Jesus is just thinking about himself. I mean, he was fully human after all. I mean, Jesus knows what's ahead of him. How would you not think, man, there was an easier way to do this? And yet at the same time, I think Jesus realized what the cost would have been. It would have cost him his soul. I think Jesus also looks out beyond the disciples, although it's real for them, and looks to us too, because the temptation is always there to sell our souls. The temptation is always there to walk away from the hard parts of life. The temptation is always there, and we'll talk about this in about 2 weeks, to walk away from the cross and just look at the easy path. And Jesus looks at that and says, but it will cost you your soul. The way to life is through death. It's always tempting to do the easy thing. I'm always tempted to give in to mediocrity. I'm always tempted to go, it's good enough. Do I really need to work harder? Do I need to do more? Do I need to serve more? That's good enough. And it's always a temptation to give in to personal comfort. I mean, it's all around us, isn't it? One of the times this came to me so starkly was a while ago now, and I was traveling with a bunch of college students, and we were in Egypt, and we were riding the first class train, because we could, from Cairo down to Luxor, and we didn't think a thing about it. And we were with an Egyptian guide who, cut me a little bit slack here. I wasn't as evolved back then as I am now. We were with an Egyptian guy who had holes in his pants that had been sewed up and not well. And we weren't sensitive enough to realize that he was wearing those pants not to make a fashion statement, but because those were the only pants he had. And we were on this train, the first class train, with all sleeping compartments and stuff. And I happened to be sitting in his compartment with him. And the lady went down the aisle, with the cart. They really do this. Some of you have only seen it in the Harry Potter movies. Come down the train with the cart that has like snacks on it. And everybody stopped and bought something. A bottle of Coke. And he looked at me after everybody got their snacks and said, you all have way too much money. Imagine, just a bottle of Coke. And yet to him it seemed like a lot. What are the temptations that you gave into this week to make your life a little bit more comfortable? It's always tempting. And sometimes we make ourselves feel better about that because, well, this is America, and this is our culture, and we've been blessed, and this is just what we need to get along. Really? It's always a temptation to sell my soul for the comfortable and the things that will gain me some more status in our society. And every time I do that, I see an Egyptian man in patched pants going, you have way too much money. It's always tempting to give in to mediocrity. It's always tempting to get into too much personal comfort. And it will cost us our souls, and it will cost us our lives. And here's the thing about souls and about lives. You only get one. You can gain the whole world and still have nothing. And you're never going to be able to get your life back. you will never be able to get your soul back. I'm somewhere in the middle, you know? I'm neither old nor young. I'm a perfect covenant. I'm right in between. And I'm gaining more perspective because I realize now more than I ever have before that this all comes to an end someday. And some things will count and some things won't. And you only have X amount of time. And you will never be able to get it back. But it's never too late either. You could be in high school and you have a choice when you go back to school tomorrow. You can waste your life. You can waste your time there. You can do things that will cost you your eternal soul. Or you can choose to have significance. You can put everything that you're doing within the context of what you know about God and serving Him. College is the same way. 20s, you can be in a time of great significance. 30s, it's all there for the taking. To put all of your gifts, to put all of your talents, to put all of your opportunities at the disposal of God within the context of a relationship with Him and what He wants you to do. Or you can squander the whole thing. We were, like we told you last week at, I'm sorry, Jason, I keep wandering. He's trying to video this. We were in Chicago last week for midwinter, and it's just such a valuable time for us. And one morning, Sammy and Blake and I sat down with Rod Taves. Rod Taves is the pastor of seniors ministry at Peninsula Covenant Church in Redwood City. And they've developed a ministry to seniors. Their church is a little bit bigger than ours is. And I think he said that they had 300 or 500 seniors on their rolls that they are ministering to. And one of the things that they're doing that I thought, dang, that's a good idea, was they have a seminar for newly retired people. And the seminar is entitled From Success to Significance. Because they're a lot like us. You know, most of their people have been really, really successful in whatever their endeavor is. And then they retire and they wonder, what am I going to do with my life? You know, I mean, yeah, you could play golf 7 days a week. I'm not talking to you, Bill McCubbins. It's just an example that I came up with. You know, but, you know, you could do all sorts of things, but now you've got this time. And now you've got the opportunity. And many of you have the resources. Why not do something significant for the kingdom? And I thought, we need a seminar like that. You've been successful in some areas of your life. Why not move into ultimate significance? So it doesn't matter how old you are. Rod Taves is 84 years old. And he just quit his job because he wants to be an interim pastor. And he says to me, I want to go to churches for 18 months at a time and then take 6 months off and then go for another 18 months. He's 84 years old. You can never get your life back. You can never get your soul back. The times that are squandered are gone forever, but the future can always be redeemed. It is never too late. So what's the antidote to that then? The antidote to just squandering your life on collecting things is to follow Jesus, is to be close to Him, is to do the things that Jesus did. Following Jesus, and that's good, but let's define that a little bit further. What do I want to do with my life? How do I want to be a person that not only is successful, but makes a significant contribution to the kingdom? Well, I wrote this down the other day because I knew I was going to ask myself the question. I could just say, I want to follow Jesus with my life, which I do, with all of my heart. But this is how I unpack that for me. By God's call, I'm partnering with God in changing the world and reaching my community for Christ. That's my purpose. That's how I'm gaining significance. By working with you guys, by investing in the community, because I love Jesus, because I want to make a difference for the kingdom. And I have discovered, and this language is important, that the closer that I get to God, because it's all about the vertical relationship with God first, the closer that I draw to God in prayer, in scripture reading, in service, in devotion, the closer that I draw to God, the more passionate I become about his plan and his purpose. And the more I want to be doing what God wants done. And the scriptures are clear. God wants the whole world to be saved. God isn't going to be satisfied unless everybody comes back to him. Well, that's easy, you say. You're in full-time ministry. You have no idea how often full-time ministry gets in the way of kingdom work. I mean, I look at lay people who poured their life into me. I look at lay people who have decided that they are going to be significant. About 4 years ago, we brought my friend Don Meyer in. Don was the executive director of communications for the Covenant Church. And before that, he was my buddy in Jamestown and was the publisher of the local newspaper. He did well for himself. And Don is a consummate businessman, and he taught a Sunday school class for business people, and he knocked it out of the park. And one of the things that people talked to me about afterwards was how intentional he was with his day. I mean, he was so far up the corporate ladder, he had the parking place at the front of the building. But every day, he parked at the back of the building because it made him walk through the entire plant. And he stopped purposefully on his way in and spoke to every employee that he saw. And he did this because he's a good guy. But he did it more because over time, he learned their names. He learned who their spouses were. He learned who their kids were. And over time, when he said, "How are you?" they would tell him what the real answer to the question was. And then he had an opportunity to pray with them, to talk with them about Jesus, to invite them to church, all because he parked at the back of the building and decided to walk through because he was more interested in being significant for the kingdom than he was in the personal success that he had found for himself. In what ways are you choosing to be significant? There's 3 questions that I want you to think about for a minute here at the end of the sermon. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about this. The first question is, what are you giving your soul to? I'm not going to ask you to share that with anybody, so you can be honest. And then 2 follow-up questions to that. Is that thing that you're giving your soul to, is that bringing you life, or is that draining life away from you? What are you giving your soul to? Is that bringing you life, or is that draining your life away? Let's take 30 seconds for you to prayerfully consider those questions. So it seems to me that there might be 3 answers to the first question. The second, we're just fleshing it out. Maybe if you look at what is deep down inside of you, you said to yourself this morning, you know what? 9 times out of 10, I'm giving my soul to the right things. In my inner life, I am all about loving God and serving him and being close to him. Great. Keep on doing that, and do me a favor, bring somebody else along with you. Somebody who is living their lives like that poured their life into me. And I'm guessing that somebody who was living their life like that poured their life into you. And that's how you got here today, by the grace of God, through the agency of some other person who was following Jesus. Maybe you looked at that and you realized that you're going to get to the end of your life and look back and realize that you will have collected a lot of stuff, whether it's titles or money or prestige or whatever. but you are going to be relationally poor. And you're going to look back and realize that you accomplished absolutely nothing of significance, and that the things that you gained cost more than they were worth. My encouragement to you is, now that you know that, start making some correctives. Start asking yourself, what do I do tomorrow to follow Jesus more closely? What do I do tomorrow to make my passions more aligned with God? You can do that through prayer. You can do that through scripture study. You can do that through mentoring. Give me a call. I'm filled with suggestions for correcting other people's problems. And then the third answer that occurs to me is, anytime we get together on a Sunday morning, we have people who are all over the spiritual spectrum. I mean, some people are absolutely committed heart and soul to Jesus. Some people are moving along, and some people in this room are not there at all. And what I want you to do is to just keep walking on the journey with us. Sometimes I think you just need to cast out a little bit further in your vision than where you are at this point and go, where am I headed? And what is that going to look like when I get there? And if you haven't bought into this whole Jesus thing yet, that's okay. But I just encourage you to start asking those questions. If I keep doing things the way that I'm doing them, where will I end up? And is it worth maybe taking a look at doing it Jesus' way instead? Let's pray.